There's a creepy meme I've seen going around lately. It says that the whole uncanny valley thing is weird. The way humans react with suspense or fear when seeing something that looks human but isn't. That maybe it's an evolutionary adaptation. Perhaps our ancestors were being hunted by something that seemed human, but was actually far worse. Today's episode is about just that, doppelgangers. If you see one, stay far away. If you confront your other self, there's no telling what might happen. Enjoy these allegedly real encounters with doppelgangers. If you have a scary story, share it with us at darkstories.org so I can narrate it on the show. However, don't use that website to submit paid submissions. Instead, if you have a scary story about cloaked figures in the woods or kayaking, use the links in the pinned comment below to submit your story, and you'll get paid if I choose to narrate it. Paid submissions are only for specific topics, and they're open only for a limited time. And remember, this show is a podcast. Just search for Unexplained Encounters on your favorite podcast app to listen there. Now, let's begin. I saw my exact double, from KyleC. When I was 15 years old, I'm pretty sure I met my doppelganger. Yeah, it sounds crazy. Believe me if you want, but I'm just here to tell my story. I live in rural California, a couple miles outside of Crescent City, so not on the coast. All around Crescent City, you see these giant redwood trees, the tallest trees in the world, and there are open acres of land. This happened 3 years ago, and since then I've moved out of the state, halfway across the country. I lived in a small house with my parents, and there were other houses scattered around the block. There was a small forest pretty much right behind my house, and I often take walks through it, but just not at night. Not because I'm scared of anything attacking me, but just because you can get lost easily, even though it's not the biggest forest. Anyway, my encounter took place at about 8 p.m. one Saturday night. I was on the back porch, just playing on my phone. I wasn't going to bed anytime soon, so I just decided to get a flashlight and take a small walk in the woods. My mom said it'd be okay, but told me not to go too far off and to not get lost. I put on my shoes and set off. I knew the trail well, so I just followed it a little bit and decided to sit under a tall redwood tree to text my friend for a while. I'd been talking back and forth with my friend when I heard a soft thump. I ignored this at first, thinking it was a small nighttime animal. When it happened again, I stood up and looked around. It was eerily quiet, and the only thing I heard was the light breeze rustling the leaves and bushes. I could no longer hear the insects, which was weird, because at night they could be heard for miles. Uncomfortable, I began walking back to my house. I'd taken a few steps when I heard something that made me stop. Soft footsteps were slowly coming my way, and I could tell they were behind me. I started to walk faster when I heard a voice. "Kyle." There was something familiar about the voice, and since it had said only one word, I couldn't pick it up. But then it spoke again. "Kyle, turn around." I froze in shock, in horror, because the voice was my voice, exactly my voice. It spoke again. "Kyle, look at me. Turn around." I turned around, and what I saw about 10 feet from me made me drop my flashlight. I saw myself, my exact body, the clothes I was wearing at that moment, my brown hair, my face, my freckles, my exact smile with the same braces I had in my mouth at the time. It seemed exactly my height too, my same hazel eyes. I was too afraid to move, but when I saw the thing sprint at me at an unnatural speed, I booked it back down the trail. I turned once, seeing the thing chasing me not too far behind. It ran awkwardly, with its legs dangling at odd angles, a terrifying smile on its face. I soon saw the tree line of my house, and when I raced up the front steps, the chasing stopped, but it stood perfectly still, now watching me with a serious and somewhat angry expression on its face. It was truly my exact double. I turned away but for a moment, and when I looked back again, it was gone. I didn't see that thing the rest of the 3 months I lived at that house, and I never did tell my parents. I avoided the woods and was greatly relieved when we moved away. Beware the forests of Crescent City. There are things there you cannot explain. People on death row can have doppelgangers too. From Anonymous. I'll begin by saying this is not my story. It was a story told to me by my cousin and my aunt. It's about a very traumatic experience she had when she was in her early 20s working at McDonald's. It's the reason that to this day she despises everything about McDonald's. The subject was brought up one night when my aunt, my cousin, and I were sitting around having a few drinks, watching TV and playing cards. We really hadn't been paying much attention to the TV until this show about women on death row came on, and my cousin caught the title, making some stupid joke about how in a few years they'd probably be watching me on a show like this because of my bad temper. After that, we all focused on the TV as the first story came on. The story was about this woman named Linda Lyon Block. I remembered that name because it sucked as much as mine. They showed the image of a woman on screen, and immediately, my aunt's eyes grew wide. I heard her say something like, "Oh my God, that looks exactly like her." My cousin and I looked at each other confused. My cousin asked, "Like who, Mom?" My aunt was kind of hesitant at first. She then asked us if we cared to know why she hated McDonald's as much as she did. More curious now than ever, my cousin and I both without hesitation said yes. The story went like this. In 1992, when my aunt was 21, she and my uncle were newly married and with a new baby, and they lived in a little crappy apartment, desperately trying to save to put a down payment on a trailer they were interested in. My uncle worked construction and made great money, but it just wasn't enough, so my aunt took an evening job at McDonald's to help with the bills and save for their new home. Those of us who've worked fast food know it's not always easy work. It can be very demanding, frustrating, and some days downright torment. Despite the stress, my aunt stuck with it and had gotten used to her routine and regular customers. On a night like any other, my aunt was stationed at the front counter. This woman and what appeared to be her 2 elementary school-aged grandchildren came in and walked to the counter to order. My aunt said the woman looked very out of place in a McDonald's. Everything about her screamed money. She wore a very expensive white pantsuit. Keep in mind this was 1992. Her hair and makeup were flawless, and she had on more jewelry than most people would wear to a big event. Despite her snobby look, the woman was very polite. My aunt took her order, then watched her kids sprint for the play place. After their food was out, it was time for my aunt's break. She went outside to have a quick smoke before she decided what to eat for dinner herself. Before she could think very far into her greasy dinner plans, she was interrupted by the sounds of a man and woman screaming at each other, and it sounded close. My aunt peeked around the building to see if she could find the battling couple. She was surprised when she found them. It was the fancy lady leaned up against her brand new Cadillac DeVille, which was also white, and some plain Jane-looking guy about her age. My aunt couldn't turn away. She inched closer, pretending to pick up garbage to get a better view. As she got closer, she could hear what they were arguing about, and could pretty much piece together their story from what they were saying. Mrs. Fancy wanted to finalize their divorce so she could remarry, and Mr. Not-So-Fancy wanted nothing of the sort. My aunt was entertained. She continued watching them scream at each other, And that's when things went way south. Mr. Plain Jane began to pace and got very frantic. Then my aunt heard him say something like, "I'm serious, Margaret. This is your last chance to take me back." Mrs. Fancy, without hesitation, said, "Absolutely not," explaining that she did not love him anymore, that it was time for them to move on. He started to pace back and forth again, then started reaching into his jacket. Mrs. Fancy told him to just leave. He then stopped pacing, staring at her like he was in disbelief. Then he pulled out a gun, shooting her 3 times. My aunt says she will never forget the sound of that woman's screams after she was shot. It was like you could hear every ounce of pain and shock and betrayal she felt. Mr. Plain Jane ran off. Right after he did this, my aunt was in shock, shaking, almost hyperventilating. She went over to the woman who had fallen back, sliding down the side of her brand new Cadillac, smearing blood on her way down. The woman's white pantsuit was no longer completely white. It looked like someone had tried to dye it red, but gave up halfway through. Even the woman's pearl-colored shoes were splattered with her blood. My aunt's manager had heard the gunshots and came outside. My aunt told him to call 911 and to lock the store doors. My aunt was trying to comfort the woman, who had finally stopped screaming, but was becoming less and less responsive by the minute. The woman asked my aunt not to let her grandkids come outside. My aunt assured her that they were in the store behind locked doors. The woman kept asking if an ambulance was coming, saying how much she hurt. She grabbed my aunt's hand and asked if my aunt would pray with her, and my aunt agreed. The woman lost consciousness halfway through the prayer. My aunt finished the prayer, and as she was doing so, she could hear sirens. When the ambulance and police finally came, the woman was dead. Still, the paramedics began to work on her right away and loaded her into the ambulance. My aunt, in shock, covered in another woman's blood, was the first to be questioned by the police. She told them everything she saw and heard. The woman's grandchildren were turned over to the police, and the restaurant closed early that night. It was closed for a few days after that. My aunt was given a week off, paid, to get her mind right. She went back for 2 days after that and just quit. As for her mind going back to where it was, it felt to her like that may never happen. Mainly because my aunt found out on the news that that woman had officially died. One of the shots had clipped an artery, and the woman had bled to death. The next day in the paper, there was a giant article on the shooting and the woman who died. My aunt learned from the article that this woman, who you could have sworn was born into money, was actually born dirt poor and had worked in a factory for 38 years. She just enjoyed buying herself expensive things, taking pricey vacations, living the good life after working hard for so long. It also said she was finally moving on from a terrible marriage, and that she'd asked her soon-to-be ex to meet her at McDonald's so they could talk about finalizing their divorce. Her fiancé offered to come with her in case her husband tried anything, but she told him that nothing crazy would happen because they were meeting in public. The whole story was just sad. Nowadays, when my aunt sees a McDonald's, it really messes with her, reminding her of the day someone literally died in her arms. Apparently, this woman looked exactly like Linda Lyon Block, the woman whose face appeared on that show about women on death row. My friend. From Anonymous. I'm a 14-year-old boy who lives in Croydon, England. This event happened not that long ago, and this is something I just had to share. I was at the local shopping center, running some errands for my mom as I do. Eventually, I was getting hungry, so I went to the chicken place to buy some wings when it happened. I heard a voice behind me calling my name. I look over and see my friend, Sean. I was a little shocked to see him since he lived in another part of town, which was quite far away from where I lived, but we still attended the same secondary school. I waved over and we had a little chat until my order was ready. I'm pretty sure it was him. He was wearing those glasses he wears, and he had his yellow bike he always took riding. I walked all the way home and went onto Snapchat to send my streaks. I go into my messages and ask Sean what he was doing at the chicken place in the first place. But then he replied, I wasn't at the chicken place. What? Yeah, you were. I definitely saw you. Talked to you. Nope. Couldn't be me. Then Sean sent me a picture of him at his cousin's house. I've been at my cousin's all day. Immediately, my head went to Doppelganger. I'm a frequent reader into the paranormal. I told Sean about it. Sean told me not to freak him out, as he was going to the fair the next day, and now he was scared. I told Sean maybe he should just stay home, and he agreed. Then on Monday, I woke up and walked downstairs. My mom was watching the news. On the news flashed a breaking report about some crazy guy who started to shoot at the fair. Apparently, 4 people had died, 6 more injured. I don't know what would have happened if I never told Sean about it. What if he'd actually gone to the fair? My best friend's Multiganger. From Anonymous. I am a pagan. This may seem like an unimportant detail, but I'm saying this so you know that I'm not anywhere near a skeptic, and I do believe this is paranormal. Now, to fully grasp the weirdness of this event, I'll have to describe my school and my friend's daily wardrobe. My junior high setup is basically 2 giant squares, an A building and a B building, with the A building being for academics and B containing gyms, locker rooms, and health classrooms. In the A building, there are 4 hallways surrounding an outdoor courtyard for lunch in the fall and spring. Each corner of the school has a stairwell that goes up to the other 3 floors. From one stairwell to another is about 300 feet, so it takes a bit of walking to get from one to another. My friend, who we'll call Maddie, is one of those girls that wears name-brand hoodies and leggings every day. She also wears her hair in a plethora of different styles, but almost always with an athletic headband on. To begin, I was walking from the B building to put my gym uniform in my locker before heading to lunch. I was about halfway to the stairwell when I saw Maddie walking down the hall in the opposite direction. I noticed she was wearing a bright pink Nike hoodie. She wasn't wearing a headband and her blonde hair hung loosely over her shoulders. We made eye contact, smiled, and continued on without stopping or speaking. Our interaction was quite mundane at first, and I didn't think that much of it. But obviously I wouldn't be here if that's all that happened. A few minutes later, I'd reached the stairs and was now ascending them. I'd gotten about 2 flights up when I noticed Maddie. Another Maddie. She was going down the stairs while having a conversation with our friend Pam. Now, Maddie was wearing her hair in 2 French braids and had a black headband on. She had on a hoodie for the local college team, which I was accustomed to seeing her wear over the years. My mind could barely understand what was going on. I didn't even process what I'd seen until we'd already passed each other, and I was starting to go up the next flight. There was no way Maddie could have gone from walking away from the stairs to walking down them in a matter of minutes. For that to happen, she would have had to sprint down the hall, go up another flight of stairs, then sprint back across the school and down the stairs, all while changing clothes and braiding her hair. Obviously, this conclusion made no sense, so I was left wondering if I'd just seen a doppelganger of my best friend. Like most would, I thought that was the end of the encounter. That was until I saw Maddie again later that day. I was packing away my notebook into my book bag when I heard Maddie come up next to me. I shut my locker and turned to face her. Then I noticed her clothes. She was wearing a gray Under Armour sweatshirt, and her hair was in 2 French braids with no headband. At this point, I'd also like to mention that Maddie didn't come to school with her backpack that day. So if she had somehow changed clothes 3 times in one day, where did she store them? I could feel the color draining from my face. Maddie must have noticed too, because she asked me what was wrong. Knowing she was a hardcore skeptic that would laugh at the slightest mention of anything paranormal, I decided it would be best not to tell her, and I gave her the classic excuse of it being nothing. We talked a bit, then parted ways to go home. One thing I'd like to mention is, being pagan, I'm usually pretty good at picking up on the energy surrounding events, places, people, etc. But the vibes during the experience were confusing. It's hard to describe, but it was almost like static. It felt fuzzy and like a dream. I can't tell you exactly how I feel about this encounter because of that. I don't feel particularly frightened by it, but it does make me a bit uneasy. The only other person I've told of this event is my friend Sydney, who's a very open-minded person. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I just thought he might be interested to hear the story of the time I saw my best friend's multigangers. Was this truly a doppelganger? From Unlucky Princess 101. While my parents are pretty wealthy, I've never liked having so much money. And even to this day, I don't. My dad used to give me such an insane amount of allowance that I usually just gave most of it away to others or charity. I've had multiple vacations to escape all of it, and during one of those, this happened. I was 22 years old, ready to leave with my suitcases all filled up to go. My mother stood next to me to the open front door, saying, "Sweetie, you could have gone to such a better place than this. Just look at it." But I was getting mad. I shouted to her, "Not everything revolves around money. Expensive doesn't make it better." To which I grabbed my suitcases and walked out the door. As I loaded my suitcases into my own car, my parents were just standing there in the opening. After I loaded all my stuff into the car and drove off, I didn't look back at them. I arrived at my friend Lisa's place and saw all the rest of my friends that were coming along, standing on the porch with their suitcases at the ready. We then arrived at the airport on time and had a pleasant flight as well. We arrived in England, at Glasgow, and went on to our hotel. We were planning a whole United Kingdom travel, just the 4 of us. A few days passed, and we'd seen some pretty beautiful places. For a girl who was raised in Oakland, this was a welcome difference. We arrived at the most expensive hotel of our trip, and of course I ended up paying for it. As a matter of fact, I paid to get the most expensive room, which at this place turned out to be a whole floor. Own bar, 5 bedrooms, own kitchen, and lots of other stuff. It was basically a house on a single floor. It was the hotel we'd spend the most time at, so I imagined that they would like to spend it in a room that was the most comfortable. The first night, after we chose our bedrooms, we ended up playing a few card games in the living room of the suite. We went to sleep pretty late, but I had a hard time falling asleep. I went out of my bedroom at one point and into the living room. But when I did, I heard a voice. It sounded like my own voice. "How about a nice glass of orange juice, huh?" It came from the kitchen part of the suite. I replied to it. "Who are you? You need to leave. I booked this suite." I did get an answer back. "Just because you're rich doesn't mean you get to say what I can do." I took a step back out of fear. Then I heard a door open behind me, and I saw my friend Beckett standing in the opening. "Can you keep it down in here?" He cut himself off from the ending of his sentence, looking at me with amazement. "Wait, I thought you were in the kitchen." Suddenly, the 2 of us heard a giggle from the kitchen. We both looked at each other. We ran to the kitchen, but when we arrived, we didn't see anyone. Confused, we decided to head back to bed after about 15 minutes. When we were all awake the next morning, Beckett and I told the others what happened last night, to which Amara said, "Well, England is known for its folklore and scary stories, so you might have just both dreamed it up." I was a bit irritated at that remark, but Beckett put his hand on mine, saying, "Trust me, we didn't dream this up." They dropped the issue. We went on to have another great day. Eventually, of course, we ended up back at the suite. But this time, we ended up filling the fridge with a ton of drinks and food we bought. Lisa downloaded everything from our cameras that day onto her laptop, and the rest of us were enjoying a few drinks. Then, out of the kitchen, we heard something drop. Beckett decided to go have a look, and when he opened the door, he said, "I can't see anyone in the kitchen." Amara then said, "Is this one of those haunted hotels of yours?" To which I answered, "No, not that I know of." Then the fridge door opened with a loud slam. I looked over at Beckett and saw something next to him. It was my own face. However, it had a smile which revealed a set of white, sharp teeth. Beckett took a few steps back into the living room, to which afterward the door slammed shut. Once again, we heard giggles coming from the kitchen. This time when the door was opened again, the lights were on, but not a single soul was seen. We stayed up for as long as we could, but eventually we all fell asleep. Another day went on without a flaw, until we got back to the hotel. We had a full blown-out dinner, which ended up a little expensive, of course, so I paid for it, just before we headed back to our suite. That night would be the worst of all. I went to take a long, soothing bath. After I dried myself off and came back into the living room, Lisa said to me, "Wait, I thought you were in the kitchen." I had a weird expression on my face. As they looked at me, I replied, "You all knew I was taking a bath, right?" An answer came from my own voice from the other side of the kitchen door. It said, "Then she's not the real me, is she?" Amara looked amazed and said, How was your voice coming from there when you're right here?" The door opened slightly. We saw my face again, popping out from the opening, saying, "Who's ready for some fun?" The door shut right away. Laughter could be heard from the other side. "Grab your bags," I whispered to my friends, who went to their rooms right away and began to pack. I was alone now with that thing, which slowly opened the kitchen door again, but this time I couldn't see it. As I slowly walked into the kitchen door slammed shut behind me, and I could hear my voice say, "I'm you now." I could hear my friends banging on the kitchen door, which clearly did not want to open. The other me jumped on me, to which I fell on the ground and began to fight back. After a moment, I got a lucky hit on something. I got up and ran, slamming into the kitchen door, getting into the living room. My friends had already opened the door to the elevator, which would go down to the lobby right away. We all entered, frantically pressing the button to close the elevator doors. We then all saw that thing that looked exactly like me, rushing to the elevator doors, which now luckily were beginning to close, just in time before that thing could get in. A few slams against the door were heard. Then we were going down into the lobby. I think we all sighed with relief. In the lobby, the staff looked at us. One of them said, "You're the ones from the suite, right?" We all looked at him, but before we could say a word, the guy explained, "Don't worry, you aren't the first ones to run out of there, and you probably won't be the last." I got angry, shouting at him, "So you knew about this and still let people into that room?" To which my friends comforted me and calmed me down. We were up the whole night, and only in the morning we went to get our suitcases from that suite. When we got back into the car that would take us to the next hotel, I looked at the window of the suite we had been staying in, and I saw that thing standing in front of the window, standing there, smiling at me with those sharp white teeth and all-around creepy facial expression. This was the only hotel we stayed at where anything creepy happened, and I was fine with that. The rest of the trip was all without problems, and we still talk about it from time to time. So far, the only creature I can think of that this thing could have been is a doppelganger.